Y'all know what it is.
Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Eggs. Today's special guests are Stacey Smith and Paul Smith, the CEO and Executive Vice President of Plasma Kinetics. In the race for alternative fuels technology, and ultimately supremacy, Plasma Kinetics has created an innovative solution to hydrogen storage that actually stores the gas in a solid state. According to their website, the system is safe, clean, and scalable, actually holding more energy than lithium-ion battery technology at a lower cost, and it can be recharged in just minutes. Their patented hydrogen capture and containment system can easily be embedded into their customers' products and integrated into existing infrastructure, finally making hydrogen more practical for real-world applications. The leadership team of Plasma Kinetics is joining us today for a discussion about hydrogen's place as an alternative energy source, the journey and innovation behind their latest product, how hydrogen might actually make the move into the mainstream, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Stacey and Paul Smith. Hi, Stacey. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Ryan? How are you, Michael?
Doing very well, thank you. Thanks so much for making the time to do this. I appreciate it. I know you guys have had a hectic morning, so I appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you. It's a good opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I guess let's just quickly kind of start at the beginning. I mean, obviously we summed up some of your background in the intro there, but let's talk a little bit about just sort of who you are, and you could sort of talk on Paul's behalf too, if you like, but sort of the two of you, how the company came to be, and why we're doing hydrogen technology.
Okay. Originally, Paul is a fairly bright guy, and he's a physicist, and he has his PhD, and his first job was in a semiconductor world where people design computer chips instead of machines, and it's all AI now. And so back then, if you know anything about how a chip is made, there's many layers to that chip, and each one of those layers actually imparts a characteristic to improve the process speed. So Paul took that same know-how of how to layer materials one over the other and repeating that layering over and over and over into making a nanoscale thin film. And that's how we achieve all of the characteristics we wanted in a material that absorbs hydrogen. That's where the fire suppression comes in. That's where we can absorb the hydrogen without any pressure, all with those repeated layers imparting the characteristics we wanted. And so a friend of ours was a race car driver and asked us when hydrogen was going to happen. And we commented on, well, Paul mostly, commented on how it would be achieved. And we had thought at that time, well, if we can think it, other people think the same things. You're not very unique. And so we waited for other people to do it. And about a year later, we started looking at where the evolution was, where the development was, saw that no one was doing it, and explored it by ourselves. We got a very modest laboratory, and I mean modest. It didn't even have indoor plumbing. We had to go outside for it. But we had big vendors, because the same vendors that supplied a little guy like us also work for these big companies. And so they saw what we were doing, became huge fans of our work, and asked us to go for a grant. And at that time, I'd said to them, you know, I feel kind of silly that we're doing this. And they said, no, this is where real innovation happens. So that's how we got started.
What time frame was this?
This was 2006.
Okay. So just a little backstory on how we kind of got in touch with you. We've actually done a couple of videos in the past that touch on hydrogen and ammonia for alternative fuel sources. One of them was with Andrew Murphy. He's a hydrogen expert out of the UK. And we talked about, you know, the storage systems and tanks and the benefits of hydrogen versus, you know, using it as a combustion engine versus like just an actual fuel cell technology. And it was a really good conversation. And we had a lot of people commenting on our YouTube channel saying, hey, you got to check out this technology. Is it Matt Farrell. Matt Farrell did a YouTube video that discussed your company and your product in depth, and we'll actually post those links as well. But when I saw that video, I saw your logo and your name on there, and so I reached out on LinkedIn and got in touch with you because of that. Can you maybe break down the technology just a little bit in layman's terms? Ryan and I both have a doctorate degree in science from the University of YouTube. So we're very well rounded in our knowledge, but layman's terms, so we can understand what's going on.
Okay. And by the way, Mr. Farrell, very nice man. We're very fortunate to have people like him spontaneously do these podcasts because they're well crafted, well executed. He had one or two inaccuracies because he didn't actually converse with us when he developed it originally. But other than that, it's superbly done. One of the things that he'd stated was that we can grab hydrogen from thin air. We cannot. We have to do it. Yes, that was a misnomer. Yeah. That was a misnomer. So how our material works? Okay, so there is knowledge that hydrogen can bond literally to a solid, and ideally that solid is a magnesium-based product. And there are things out there called magnesium hydrides. We do not consider ourselves a magnesium hydride. We do a magnesium hydride typically takes energy to drive the hydrogen into and bond to the magnesium. We can actually absorb the hydrogen at ambient pressure, which is just atmospheric pressure. And so our thin film, if you can picture it, is layers and layers and layers of like I said, repeating materials, one over top of the other, like magnesium and copper, things like that. And but as they're deposited, there's a very specific structure that we create that actually creates nooks and crannies, and they're specifically tuned to bond with hydrogen specifically. And not anything else. And so we ignore a lot of other elements that are harmless, like carbon and things like that, that we can just absorb the hydrogen. Now we capture it, like I said, under atmospheric pressure. So that means there's no cost of energy to put the hydrogen into our material. And once it's bonded, it becomes a solid. It's no longer a gas. And because of that, it's non-flammable, non-explosive. And so what we then do is once it's there, we can remove the hydrogen, because one of the elements that Paul put in our material makes it photoreactive. It makes it light sensitive. It's almost the same as a DVD player light responding to the media to play the video. It works in much the same way. So until our material is exposed to light, and it's a very specific wavelength of light, the hydrogen will stay in perpetuity. We've done a test for 5 years, and we've not lost a single molecule of hydrogen in a 5-year period, just storing it normally. And that's one of the problems with hydrogen typically, is it's a small molecule, so it often doesn't stay contained, or you need energy to keep it contained. And we don't need to do that. So that's a real win for our material. And if there was an emergency, any kind of catastrophic emergency, and our canister would break open, there's not enough of the wavelength of light that we use in nature to actually have a great whoosh of hydrogen come out. So it's pretty safe.
Huh. Hey, Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. I would like to show your website.
Sure. Just now, so I made this website. Don't pick on me.
So, this is the container that stores the hydrogen, right? Is this
that is a modest version, because there's going to be different applications. Our very first foray is going to be for large applications like wind solar farms. So we have a canister that holds around 17 kilograms of hydrogen. This is a much smaller canister that's sort of like the DVD player that we originally started out with, and that can be for much smaller applications.
So that would be for more like a use in a personal vehicle type thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I think that might be a good place to jump into a topic about that. Like maybe just talking a little bit about, so I think people who maybe are laymen or sort of new to this idea of hydrogen as an alternative fuel might be familiar with the idea of using it as a gas.
Mhm.
But can we talk maybe a little bit more about the benefits of using it as a solid state versus that? You mentioned flammability, but are there other reasons that solid state hydrogen is actually a better choice?
Um, it's really the safety and the portability, because that's one of the other things when you're talking about tanked hydrogen or liquid hydrogen. As I mentioned before, it's hard to keep the hydrogen in those canisters. They do leak over time, or they require energy to keep them where they are. And also, because ours is a solid, it's not a gas. When you transport hydrogen, typically in a canister or a liquid, you have all kinds of placards, hazard placards you need to put on transportation. And you need maybe a special type of truck that costs $1 million just to drive this hydrogen around. Whereas our canisters can be fueled and then moved all in the same shipping container, never having to do any kind of step downs or steps up with pressure or any of the safety problems. Right now with tanked hydrogen, if you're transporting by rail, because you can't do it by flight, ours is safe enough. Even lithium-ion batteries is receiving some flags for flying, with these batteries, because they have problems. And so with our system, we can go through tunnels, we can use rail. Right now, rail has to stop at every state line and offload all the tanks of hydrogen and wait for an inspector to come there, which they don't come every day, and then put them back on. And then if they're going to the next state, they have to stop at that state line. So our system becomes a lot less complicated. And we
And
don't
that's
need any of
main.
the, yeah, beg your pardon.
That's mainly due to the fact that it has to interact with the light for it to have any type of
Volatility,
chemical
yeah,
change, volatility.
exactly. Yeah.
How hot? I mean, like, are we talking like a DVD type laser that's just tuned
Yeah,
at
just a
right?
exactly, nothing very sophisticated or expensive. Just, yeah,
That's crazy. Um,
that's Paul.
oh, is Paul?
No, but that's
Oh, okay.
Paul. He's the beauty.
Are there any other benefits in terms of solid state versus hydrogen or versus, gas hydrogen in terms of efficiency around use? Like Mike mentioned earlier, the use case of automobile, for example, right? And obviously right now there's a big push for electric cars and things like that. But I mean, with the prior guests we've had on, there's been some discussion about using hydrogen for vehicles as well. And is there any benefit? I mean, obviously at least in my mind, the safety benefit is enormous for, if it's in the trunk of a car, more or less. But are there any other efficiencies or, ability to use or anything like that actually would make it a better choice for that sort of energy production?
Well, I sort of said it before. It's the infrastructure. We don't need any of the infrastructure that tanked or liquid hydrogen needs. That's incredibly expensive around capturing, storing, transporting, even at the refueling stations. Their refueling stations cost over $2 million per station, and you can only subsidize so many of those practically, to make them accessible. And with ours, it's going to be in the $200,000 range, because we don't need to store it underground. We don't need to have all those iterations that make it safe, because ours already is safe. And as I said before, we do have a cost for pulling the hydrogen out efficiency wise. We don't have a cost for the flip side of that, which is putting it in. And so all the way around, aside from the safety, we think we make hydrogen practical from the standpoint of we don't need all the other gyrations or safety that needs to happen for it to be portable.
So, in that video that Matt did, he talked about in 2009, you guys applied for a patent for your technology, and you were actually kind of held up because of that. Was that accurate? Was that correct? Was it kind of like a defensive strategy for, like, we can't let you use this technology, we can't give you the patent because of defense issues?
Well,
did he address that correctly?
Yes and no. We filed for our first patent in 2008, and we actually filed it in South Korea, because South Korea does a real search, and here in the United States, as a first-time inventor, oftentimes you're not prioritized. And so by going through South Korea, it kind of they did a true search and said, yeah, this is viable, and it's not related to anything else. So we're going to give you the green light. It forced the U.S. Patent Office to do the same. And what happened was I mentioned earlier that we had these vendors that became huge fans of our work, and they knew to commercialize, we were never going to be able to do it because we're self-funded to do this on our own. So they mentioned this ARPA-E grant, which was offered in 2008. And so we apply for that. It's a two-phase government application. Typically, grants are not just one request. You got to get a nod for the second phase. And so we apply, and there's 3,500, I think, applicants. And it's supposed to be for the entrepreneur. And yet it's every university and every major corporation and us. And we apply for this grant, and they give us the green light as one of the 100 finalists. And so we're pretty excited. They said our work had the chance of becoming highly transformational, which is a very technical term, apparently, that they don't use lightly. So this was very exciting to us. And so by 2009, the administration changes to the Obama administration, and they don't view hydrogen as the future. And so they're the second phase of the application review. And we get some pretty good reviews from the judges. And then there's another judge that's added on that wasn't in the first part. And they say, yeah, this is all great, but you're not the future. And so we don't get any money, which is fine. They then turn around, the United States government, and labels our work they label it disruptive, which is a bad term. And disruptive means that they restrict our work for national strategic importance. And so we are in national strategic importance and other programs called SAWS, Sensitive Applications Warning Systems, for about a decade. And it's very hard to do business when you're in programs like that. And so I guess what I'm understanding, because we are pretty ignorant, is that energy itself is a weapon. And determining who gets to embargo, what prices are, who gets to industrialize is a component of energy. And we threatened that, is what they said. So now we're getting it's not really if you're living it, trust me.
Yeah, no, I can imagine.
We thought we were doing
it's been a
something really
nightmare.
good. We thought we were doing something really, really good. At the very least, I thought, honestly, because I'm not the brains of this part, is that we would help somebody else make a leg up, in achieving a hydrogen economy. But we're going to do it, and so we're going to keep going.
So, Toyota, a few other companies have embraced hydrogen as a alternative source of fuel. They're actually there's fueling stations in California. They just released a new car. I don't know if you looked on the Super Bowl last year. All the ads were embracing EV technology, so
Sure.
electric vehicles, everything. With Toyota getting behind the fuel technology, like the actual compressed gas, and they're building refueling stations, and with EVs being prevalent, how do you make a niche in this market where you got big players like Toyota and Exxon Mobil and all these big companies with big pockets? Are you almost getting kind of like pushed to the side just because they've already built the infrastructure for what they want to do?
Well, there is pushback because there are standards that do get set around technologies, because there has to be a framework for everybody to play in. And if you know anything about the Mirai or Clarity, they were fantastic vehicles, but they had so few fueling stations that it wasn't practical. And so what I had said earlier is that we're going to go into stationary applications first, like helping wind and solar. Or other hydrogen producers. There are so many producers of hydrogen that don't have a means that's practical to help them along. And I think it was now almost 2 years ago, just in California, they closed down 108 solar farms because they can only commoditize the energy during the day, but the excess energy, they're not able to easily practically make the money they need to make a go of it. And just with helping with their system by being able to give them an extended day, we're able to help them become viable. And at the same time that we're integrating with these stationary applications, it will build the infrastructure and the logistics for then being able to support cars realistically. Instead of having onesies, Tuesdays, 5 stations around, we'll have all of the canisters we need to then go into mobile applications. Going into a car first and then, oh yeah, let's play catch up on the refueling stations just didn't seem like a good idea to us.
I actually kind of like that approach. So the approach with the wind stations, essentially, you're going to bring like a container in to capture the hydrogen. It'll charge it, then you can take it off and use it at another location, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Or you just okay.
Yeah. And also they can return it back to the grid as well. They can keep it there and support their local utility company. But the idea is that the utility companies don't always offer the best bang for their buck, so they're looking for other options.
Yeah. So how many times can this film be charged? Is it like a regular bar? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, it's a great question. So our material, like I said, is very specifically structured to bond with hydrogen. And so when it fills up with hydrogen, the material actually expands. And then when we shine the light on it, it releases the hydrogen. There's actually a physical response that goes along with the light interaction that squeezes the hydrogen and adds to the efficiency of the release. We work with, there's multiple forms of hydrogen. There's the protium, deuterium, tritium, all those kind of things. Tritium isn't really naturally occurring, but deuterium is. And so what happens is at about 150 cycles, we're releasing the protium over and over and over again, and our material starts to get a little embrittled. And then at the same time, there's some deuterium that's left behind. And it's an appreciable enough, not very much, but an appreciable enough amount that we're not 100% anymore on absorption and desorption of releasing hydrogen. So we're at about 98%. Well, that 1.5–2% of deuterium is a commodity. And we've had off-takers already contact us, several of them, that would buy all of the deuterium that we have, which will then pay for the 100% recycling of our material. There's no waste in our material. There's no rare earth elements. There's no dangerous chemicals or processes in any of the things that we do to make our thin film and then break it down. So we can reuse it. And because we're working with someone to purchase that deuterium, it'll keep the price down so that we can become a practical resource for hydrogen.
Oh, okay. So the film itself is like thinner than a human hair, correct?
Correct. But yet thousands of layers, or 1,000 or so layers, but yet thinner than a hair. Yes.
That's incredible. And is it graphite based mainly?
No, it's not. It's actually a you know that stuff that you use if you were to do plumber's tape. That's PTFE. That actually, we use one that NASA uses that has it's called a polyimide. It's got an aluminum coating on top of it, and we deposit our material directly on top of that on both sides. And so that's our initial material, and it's light, but it's not that light. So for aviation, it wouldn't be ideal. But once we're in production with these larger applications, like for wind and solar, they're not concerned about the weight of our material. We're still lighter than a lithium-ion battery by a good bit. But for other sensitive applications for weight, we do have an alternative substrate that we're going to be introducing. We just don't feel it's necessary as our first foray, and it will be graphite based.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask him, maybe this is kind of like a novice question. So forgive me if I'm being stupid.
Hey, I'm a novice too.
No, and so, I mean, we've talked a little bit about how the hydrogen is gathered and then again, how it's released. When this goes off, I guess, or when that chemical reaction happens, how does the energy escape your cartridge and move into whatever device? I mean, does it go through some sort of machine, or how's it being amplified and then used for energy?
Okay. So, and as I've said to you before, the hydrogen is highly organized when it bonds it to our film because there's the structure organizes it. And it actually makes it so that the hydrogen is much closer to each other than it would normally be naturally occurring. That's why you need 5 and 10,000 psi for a canister, because hydrogen doesn't like to be next to itself. So it naturally wants to pull apart. And so we actually do something against what it's comfortable with by organizing it. Well, once we start releasing the hydrogen with the light, it actually starts to do what it normally does, which is expand and move away from itself. And so it builds its own pressure. So we can actually, depending on how fast we move the film with the light, or how intense the light is, we can control the release to the molecule to achieve the efficiency, that the release that whatever we're supplying needs. So there's no waste, but it actually will generate its own pressure. And so that'll create at least 4 bar of pressure that can then feed a fuel cell. And most fuel cells run practically on a 4 bar pressure. So it will be ported right to a fuel cell, depending. Now, if you're going with a hydrogen IC engine, it'll be ported to that, but we actually do create back pressure.
Huh. So are there any similarities to a solid state battery? I've seen this.
There's so many different kinds. I'm sure there are portions of it are the same. It's our mechanism for how we, like I said, don't require pressure. Most of them do, or the fact that our material releases it with a light is which makes us unique. And the other thing that makes us unique is that we can 100% recycle our material.
Yeah. That is very that's amazing, because you think of like a battery, for example, like the lithium-ion, the harvesting and gathering, that right there, that's not recyclable. That's not that right there is a commodity. So it for some, being able to manufacture your film and have someone that's actually buying the byproduct, and then you can actually recycle it and reuse it. It just seems like, it almost seems like it's too good to be true.
That's, yeah. I've been through this whole entire thing, and if I haven't lived it, and what's funny is we actually, because we were closed down for a decade, by the time we were done, we were buying equipment used from Motorola and other places to achieve. We had a scanning electron microscope. We had clean rooms. We had everything you could think of by the time we got to our second facility. And so there was we took what we knew for our formula, and we worked on the process for how to achieve a manufactured product that was practical. And so we worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And I had a gentleman come through who was looking to investigate somebody else's technology, and he heard Paul was a smart man. And so he asked to meet with us, and he did. And we gave him some advice while he was there. And his name's J.R. Song. And so he went through our place, and then he left, and we said goodbye, and we didn't think anything of it. And he contacted us about a year ago and said, it's time to reintroduce your technology. Let me help you. So all of the people that are talking about us is because of JR's persistence. We weren't going to bring it back. And so what I was going to say, though, is JR is one of those seers as believers. And he said to us, if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't have believed you either. So I understand. It's very hard. It's one of those things where we were paying out of our own pocket for a lease on a space that was 3,000 square feet. We've worked with Wollongong University very briefly, Lerms University very briefly. They were just okay. We worked with Nottingham University. We worked with Cranfield and ASU and U of A. So we didn't work in a vacuum. We worked with other people. It's funny, we were very much pro, the interns that we worked with and the departments that we worked with, and we valued every single person that worked with us to get here. But it wasn't just us doing hocus pocus. There's a lot of people that helped us understand. And who else helped us greatly were our vendors. They have their own PhDs in their team as well for developing product and understanding their products. And so we would pick their brains all the time to understand how we could make our system better. So it's not, it wasn't just us.
Yeah, that's
think that's
awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say that's an awesome story of collaboration too. I mean, with inventors, typically a lot of it is all about them. So it's cool to hear about all the collaboration. I wanted to ask, we've covered a little bit the recyclability of the materials and things like that. But like from a practical standpoint, let's say that I've got this on my wind farm, and we go through our however many cycles we can get through. How do we then go about like actually changing this stuff out? Like, what's the maintenance like on these?
Okay, sorry about that. I was on mute. How that works is we are selling the capability of storing and releasing hydrogen in cycles. So at 150 cycles, we would swap out the canisters, give you new. So we're not actually selling the canisters or the thin film itself. We will own and maintain that, and you are just buying hydrogen capability. So we'll come by every so often and pick up the material, and we have so many countries asking to work with us to become producers and maintenance for us in other countries. And we've had enough interest in the technology to justify being on 4 different continents. It's just we're thrilled, but everyone's hesitant. They don't want to be the first. And I started to allude to it before. That we had this really great. Hold on just a second. I keep getting a battery low. Hold on a second. Let me plug into here. I kept getting all this inquiries about our technology, and it's great, but everybody's afraid because they can't see a demonstration. But like I said, spending $3,000 a month for a facility and then all the upkeep and the utilities, when we weren't able to commercialize, we broke down everything because one, we didn't want the secrets conveyed. Two, we were under restrictions, so we couldn't convey them. And so we just sold everything. Everything was sold. So it's a trust factor at this point. And we've had interest from medical devices to fish farming, all kinds of processes that use hydrogen that would benefit from our system, that we thought we understood where we would go and what we would do and what our priorities would be. But our customer base, so to speak, has been telling us, and that's the best part of my job, is learning how they envision employing our technology. But getting the first people, at first we were hesitant because we don't want to take people's money if we weren't going to be viable. And now we have to. We have to start making sales to then be able to do this. And we're telling everybody once we're fully funded, it's 18 months to go to production prototypes. And we've already identified our beta testers.
So at the current moment, the only thing that's out there are these renderings of the actual product. It's like the 3D rendering. So are we going to be seeing some actual product in the near future, like actual physical pictures, or how long are we looking at before that can be made
18
public?
months. 18 months. And it's a funny thing. Like I said, this is such a political. I keep getting battery low. Hold on.
Huh.
Yeah, while she's fixing that, I'll just kind of add to it. I just wanted to say it is interesting how political this becomes. And actually, I mean, this podcast in particular is really a business podcast. We spend a lot of time talking about leadership and things like that. But some of our most viewed videos are the battle between hydrogen and traditional fuels, or hydrogen and ammonia, things like that. So it's really interesting how polarizing this topic can be. So speaking of just sort of the political nature of it, which is really interesting, because I mean, if you're just, I don't know, being a normal human and you're just thinking about it, you're like, well, of course, if we can get clean energy, why not? And if this is better, why not? And but then from the political angle, it's a totally different
It's thing. Much more complicated. Many years ago, things like ARPA-E, like I mentioned before, the grant we went with the Department of Energy, is a public announcement of the newest technologies potentially coming on the market. And so we were contacted by other countries like Russia. And this is a million years ago. And first they asked a whole bunch of questions and wouldn't identify themselves. And you could tell they were reading a script, and they were from the UK actually. And so I asked, who do they represent? And finally, we got to the point where they explained that this was Russia and an investment firm that they had there that's 70% U.S. or rather Russian government owned, and that they, as a superpower, you innovate, and you also have money. And they had money, but were not innovating. And so they wanted to be able to buy innovation to also claim it. And so, we at the time we really want to make great jobs here in the United States. That's our goal. And so when we're talking to this person, and they said that we asked about the violence there, because we hear about all the time, and we have family who travels there for business, and they said, oh, the violence is much worse than what you hear on TV. And we're like,
great.
okay, that's a selling feature. That was, so anyway, getting back to innovation, the US as a country likes to tout their innovations too. And so as a country, ours is not the only technology that's been squished for a while. Gosh knows whatever else there was that's probably far better than what we've ever dreamed of. And we don't know about it because they're being suppressed. And so the funny thing about that is that we're now all set. We find out who our customers are. We find out that there's actual need for our technology, where to enter the market. We're ready to go to investment. And the next thing we know, we select our investor, and then we're called up and told that we need to pick another investor. And so trying to find a unicorn twice is not nearly as much fun, because there's got to be a leap of faith, with the technology. I can't tell you how many people I start a conversation with. We have to reestablish our facility. We have no demonstrations. All our equipment was sold, and the equipment's broken up, and there's no demo. And I go from there with a conversation, and then 4 meetings later, I get, so when can we see the demo? And I look back at my notes very promptly and say, okay, you did actually tell these people, but it's not the first thing everybody hears, Yeah.
So this technology is kind of, you're not necessarily the first ones to do it, correct? I think
no, we improved it.
Yeah. So ThyssenKrupp, I don't know if I'm saying that right. They have a metal hydride cylinder as well, and they use it in German submarines. Is that correct? I don't know if you know about that.
I'm pretty ignorant, so I wouldn't know.
Okay.
I apologize. Paul probably would, but we how Paul likes to describe it is there were several different sciences that were well known, but nobody took the opportunity to put them all together. So it's sort of like the pencil and the eraser. He put the two together.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart, and I actually quite like that. Taking the technology and iterating. I mean, basically, this is how we do it, right? And it's actually, sort of what you pointed to, the damage and all the suppression of this technology is that it actually slows down or delays the growth of these technologies, right? So, I mean, we could have been in a position, given all the hydrogen research and all that stuff at the time you guys rolled out the first time, we could have been in a position to go forward on this stuff. But instead, due to these, sort of political factors, we're not maybe as far along as we ought to be. And it's really unfortunate. So, but I like the idea of sort of melding these different technologies or iterating. And I actually spent, I guess, 3.5 years working in a semiconductor plant. And so I have some familiarity with how the wafers were built and stuff, of course, back then. I mean, it's been some time now. But so, this technology, you're taking that technology and then using it in this way, I think is really interesting.
Thank you. And just so you understand, a chip manufacturing plant in today's world costs $1 billion to make. And for our purposes, we don't do half of the packaging that's necessary in the semiconductor world. And we also don't need the level of sophistication in our equipment for a thin film deposition. So we don't need, our first facility is only going to have 2 lines, and it's roughly in the realm of $20 million, and it's increasing every day, unfortunately, because inflation is and pricing is just skyrocketing on so many different levels, and everybody's experiencing that either through supply chain shortages or other obstacles for labor, etc.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. This is a really challenging time to start any business, let alone one that's so capital intensive. And so, I mean, I can only imagine the struggle.
It's a good time. It's not for the faint of heart, but we're not quitters, and we'll get it done.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, I love that. And I just think, for the, average inventor or average person, I mean, hearing a story like this, basically fighting through regulation, fighting through all this stuff. I mean, so much about, developing a business is really about the perseverance. And it's funny that you were mentioning the fact that basically you guys have just, this is something that you really wanted to do and you're just going to kind of do it. And you stood around and waited for somebody else to do it and then took the initiative. I was actually listening to a podcast last night with Mark Zuckerberg, and that was sort of his approach to Facebook also, just like he sat around and waited for somebody else to make it. Like, why would it be me? And, and then he went on, of course, to build Facebook and everything. And so it's such an interesting dynamic, but I think that a lot of people fall into that trap. But I really applaud your, keeping on this thing and fighting through it, because I think, somebody has to do it on behalf of these technologies. So I think it's great.
Well, thank you very much, and I encourage anybody. We've just had a very a very odd thing happen with the technology. We never anticipated this kind of. We should have. I guess we were very naive because we knew that everybody was clamoring for an alternative. We knew the business part of it because who are we? Paul actually has developed a lot of different technologies over the years, but he's not particularly known for them because he doesn't wear it like a badge. He's very quiet about what he's done because that's behind him. And so Paul's a fairly smart guy, and he doesn't really like to talk about himself very much. But as far as this technology goes, it's I just didn't understand the politics. But the funny thing is now countries, including ours, want the technology. So I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah. Well, we are kind of at that time, Stacey. Thank you so much for making time for us and talking about the tech that you're working on and everything that's going on in your world. Can you maybe tell us where people can reach out if they're interested in learning more? What's next? Where do you see this in 10 years? It'd be interesting. I would love to see this everywhere in 10 years. If it's as if it had all the benefits are there and everything works the way it's supposed to, I would love to see this everywhere.
Well, so. the only way you reach us is through our website, and it has our contact information there. And as far as the adoption, I'm overwhelmed. We have countries contacting us wanting to work with us. The people who want to provide us with mining materials, because we do use, like I said, no rare earth elements, but we still need material. They've actually volunteered to help find us funding. Everybody's coming out of the woodwork because they see this as what's going to be viable, and we get a lot of support. But I also get a lot of people who reach out to me who want to invest privately. But we can't take private. We're not set up we're not publicly listed, and so we can't take private money unless they're an accredited investor. And so if you ever see any websites or anything suggesting that you can invest in our company online, please don't do it. It's a scam, and there are scams out there. So the best way to reach us is on our website itself, and that's plasmakinetics.com.
Perfect. Well, that sounds great. Thanks so much for Stacey for doing this. A really interesting topic. And, it's funny, like we mentioned, it's funny how, I guess, like polarizing the idea of hydrogen as an alternative fuel is. And so for listeners of this show, there's been a particularly lively discussion about it. And this is, despite all that conversation, the first time I've heard of anybody doing something solid state like this. So I think this is really innovative, and I'm excited to hear about it in the future.
Well, thank you for helping get the word out about our technology, because the more people who hear about it, the more comfortable they'll be and ready to be, because people reject what they don't understand and don't know. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, like we said, thanks so much for joining us, and we really appreciate your time. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the podcast this week and every week. And see you guys next time.